may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay, my dudes, we are going to be going through and we are going to be looking at some running backs that I think have access to elite ceilings. Now, we have talked about some of these players before, but I really want to highlight these guys because I think based on their current ADP, you're going to be finding a pretty big difference between our rankings that are coming out very, very shortly on Patreon on the 20th. Those are going to be posted, and what you're going to have in your drafts this year. And I want to try to identify some players that we're higher on compared to consensus. And the reason we're higher on them is not necessarily just because of their median projection, because we know that while median projections are very useful in fantasy, what you really have to understand is you have to understand the range of outcomes for a player, because you can't win your league if someone just actually meets their ADP. You need to be drafting the guy that can come out and he can crush. You can look back at the year and go, okay, we won because we drafted Stephon Diggs. We drafted Josh Allen in 2020. That's what you're trying to chase. You're trying to chase elite access to that ceiling. And I think all of these running backs have that. Now, of course, before we get into the list, go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. Now, I thought that literally everybody watching these videos was already subscribed, but for whatever reason, y'all have been destroying the like button, and maybe we're getting recommended to new listeners or something, because, I mean, we're raising up like 100 subscribers a day. So thank you so much for all the support. Of course, I mean, it is only going to continue to rise as we go to our new studio at the end of this month. But yeah, let's dive into it. Let's talk about Antonio Gibson to kick this off. Now, we're going to be very brief here on Antonio Gibson. Now, y'all know I can sit here and I can talk about him forever, but we just made a video last week where we went through and I highlighted Antonio Gibson and talked about how we thought that he was going to be taking that David Johnson type jump going into year 2 based on his profile coming into the NFL and based on what you had with his rookie season. Now, here with Antonio Gibson, you're looking at him as being the running back 13 in high-stakes drafts right now. He is going directly behind Cam Akers, Najee Harris, and Aaron Jones, and directly ahead of Joe Mixon and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And we actually have him ranked as a top 10 running back. I have Antonio Gibson as my running back 10. I have him actually ahead of guys like Najee Harris, and I have him ahead of Nick Chubb. The ranking between Antonio Gibson and Nick Chubb really highlights how we approach fantasy football, in that I will be the first one to admit, if you're looking at median projections in players that have higher floors, of course, Nick Chubb does have a higher floor than Antonio Gibson. But what we are focusing in on is we are trying to find that next Christian McCaffrey. We're trying to find that next David Johnson, because if you can successfully identify that player, you're actually going to end up having a 25% win rate compared to everybody else. And we know that that's an exponential gain in value. So really, understanding that difference in just fantasy football philosophy, in my opinion, is going to get you very far when you know that the average win rate that you should expect in a season is 8.3%. I mean, if you're playing in a 12-team league, you're going to win about 8% of the time. We're trying to jack that up to about 20%, understanding that it doesn't matter how good you are at fantasy football. The majority of the time, you are going to be losing. It doesn't matter if you're the best fantasy football player on the planet. I mean, I consider myself a very skilled fantasy football player, and that I'm literally investing thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars into fantasy drafts this offseason. And I'm 22 years old, so it's not like I have a lot of money to begin with, but it's because we've seen a significant ROI across our fantasy football portfolio over the past 3 years now, where I think that's a pretty damn good spot. And what you have to understand is you're going to be losing the majority of the time, but what you need to do is chase those league-winning players, because if you can win 1 out of every 5 leagues, you're going to be incredibly profitable. So with Gibson, we go through and we look at the access that he has to that elite ceiling. And of course, we need to talk about the fact that he is 6 foot, 228 pounds. He ran a 4.39 40-yard dash. And we had someone in the YouTube comment section the other day telling me that 40-yard dash doesn't matter for running backs. And my God, that could not be more wrong at all. Now, yes, I will say 40-yard dash for fantasy football. A lot of people really don't know how to use this statistic and how you are evaluating these players, but it is directly correlated to fantasy success, especially when you get on the boundaries and you size adjust it as well. You look at BMI, you look at 40-yard dash, you look at what that means with a player in their comparison, and it is definitely an indicator for running backs when they get opportunity with what kind of explosion you can see. So don't try to bring me that argument. I literally laid it out in our Dynasty Rookie Draft Guide, a historical analysis on a minimum threshold that you're expecting from the 40-yard dash. So no, that matters. It matters that Antonio Gibson is a size-adjusted freak when it comes to his athleticism. He was drafted at the very top of the 3rd round last year, only 23 years old. I mean, just turned 23. And obviously, this is a former college wide receiver. This is someone that we know can catch passes coming out of the backfield. The main thing was he just wasn't ready in pass blocking because, I mean, you're not expecting a wide receiver to know how to do that. So they had to take him out on obvious passing down situations. They had to put in J.D. McKissic. But with that still happening, Antonio Gibson on 1st and 2nd downs was incredible with what he was able to do in his rookie year for a player that was new to the running back position. Keep in mind, this was the season that you had no preseason, you had very little training camps, and Antonio Gibson was literally changing positions, and he came out, and in weeks 1 through 12, so we're looking at before his toe injury, Antonio Gibson was the running back 11 in points per game. He averaged over 12 carries a game, over 3.5 targets. He had almost 80 yards a game, and he had a touchdown a game as well. So he really proved that he can be used on all 3 downs. At least he was only used on the first 2, but even with only snaps on 1st and 2nd down, he was still getting targeted out of the backfield. So that tells us that this is a player that can eventually take that 3rd down role. And what you're finding is the other running backs in the backfield, and both Peyton Barber and J.D. McKissic, them cutting down on their snaps, possibly Peyton Barber getting cut from this roster, given the fact that he only has $300,000 on the dead cap and he's owed over $1.5 million. I mean, it's going to open up so much opportunity for Antonio Gibson, where the combination of those 2 running backs averaged over 11 carries a game. They averaged 7.5 targets a game. I mean, if you go through and you give half of this production over to Antonio Gibson, you're looking at him with 18 carries a game, 7 targets a game, which I know that's a lot. I know that is very close to being at the top of the NFL in targets per game. But guys, Antonio Gibson is a former collegiate wide receiver. If there's anybody that's going to do that, it would be Gibson. And it's also giving him about 120 total yards a game. So Gibson, I do think, has access to not only be a top 5 running back in fantasy, but I think if you look at the tail end of his range of outcomes, if we are just going, what's the 95th percentile outcome for Antonio Gibson? I think he could be the #1 running back overall in fantasy. And that's why I'm fine drafting him as our running back 1 and literally just hammering in wide receiver value. Because if you walk away from a draft and you have Antonio Gibson and then you have a Tyreek Hill, you also have a Michael Thomas, Keenan Allen, I mean, good luck for any of your league mates trying to beat you if Antonio Gibson hits his 90th percentile outcome, because you will literally have a roster that is so far out ahead of the rest of the field that nobody else really has a chance. Okay, so now let's go to our next running back. We are also significantly higher on him compared to consensus. This is going to be A.J. Dillon. Okay, so right now with A.J. Dillon, he is currently being drafted as the running back 38 in high-stakes leagues, and we currently have him ranked as the wide receiver 31. And now, I know that a lot of people are going to go to the comment sections. They're not necessarily going to hear me out on this. But guys, I have said this time and time again, and I want to reiterate it. Let's look at a side-by-side comparison of Derrick Henry and A.J. Dillon and their size-adjusted athleticism coming into the NFL. Because we know Derrick Henry is literally superhuman. He is something that we have never seen before in terms of how tall he is, how much he weighs, and the speed that he ran that 40-yard dash. Well, Derrick Henry, 6'3", 247 pounds, and ran a 4.54 40-yard dash. Absolutely ridiculous. Well, here with A.J. Dillon, he actually is 6 foot, 247 pounds. So if you're talking about just his overall BMI, I mean, he's a bigger running back than Derrick Henry. And he runs a 4.53 40-yard dash. So technically a little faster, but essentially the same thing. I mean, he has a larger frame than Derrick Henry. He is the exact same speed. And no, I am not saying A.J. Dillon is Derrick Henry. We always have one troll going to the comment section and going, but Mason, A.J. Dillon doesn't have the ability to see those holes in the line. And of course, I mean, if I was sitting here saying that A.J. Dillon was better than Derrick Henry, I mean, I would have him ranked higher than running back 31. Of course, we know that Derrick Henry is a significantly better running back. but you're just looking at this prospect profile and going, okay, this man is a freak. He was drafted in the second round. He was only drafted like 10 picks behind both J.K. Dobbins and Cam Akers. He was literally right in that same range. Now, Jamal Williams is leaving this team. That's going to open up a significant role for A.J. Dillon. And you're actually looking already at one game in which you had no Aaron Jones and no Jamal Williams. Actually, let me walk that back, because Aaron Jones actually played in this game. It's honestly kind of just hard to believe. But in that game where Aaron Jones did play, keep in mind he was dealing with an injury, so he didn't play a full slate of snaps. But anyway, A.J. Dillon came out, 21 carries, 129 total yards, 2 touchdowns, and a reception. So here with A.J. Dillon, you're not necessarily looking at him as ever being a running back that has potential to get work on all 3 downs. But what you're finding is you're finding an elite level handcuff, in that if Aaron Jones goes down to an injury, which we have seen multiple times before, all of a sudden, A.J. Dillon, I can almost guarantee, becomes a top 12 running back in fantasy. And what's great about drafting A.J. Dillon is there's also the out where maybe you don't have an Aaron Jones injury this upcoming season, and you don't want to just necessarily look at that pick as a total waste. I would argue that A.J. Dillon has an easier path to be started in games where the other starting running back is healthy than Tony Pollard. Because in the case of A.J. Dillon, what you're finding is this being a running back that, like we said, is literally bigger than Derrick Henry. And who would you rather have at the goal line in that scenario? Would you rather have Aaron Jones? Would you rather have A.J. Dillon? So I think A.J. Dillon actually does give you access to some kind of floor on a week-to-week basis with his goal line usage. So yeah, Dillon, I'm going to be significantly higher on compared to consensus. I mean, right now, we have A.J. Dillon ranked higher than Leonard Fournette because we don't believe Fournette has any access to 3-down potential with Ronald Jones, with Giovanni Bernard, with Keyshawn Vaughn, all there. It doesn't matter if there's an injury to one of the running backs in that backfield. We have him higher than James Conner. We have him higher than Tony Pollard and Kenyan Drake. But speaking of Kenyan Drake, he's another running back that we are going to be higher on compared to consensus, where we have him currently as running back 34 and ADP has him as running back 37. And I actually just drafted Kenyan Drake as our running back 2 in the high stakes flock league. And oh my God, we had so many people down there in the comment section going, and Mason, you ruined this draft. Having Kenyan Drake as your running back 2, I mean, you're completely dead. Well, guys, you really have no idea how league formats actually play into strategy and drafts. Clearly, you can see that. It doesn't matter that you start 3 wide receivers on a week-to-week basis. It doesn't matter that you have 3 additional flex spots. So you really want to be starting 6 wide receivers every single week. So when I draft 6 wide receivers before my second running back, everybody's pulling their hair out just because they aren't really used to playing in different league formats and they don't necessarily know how to adjust. But regardless, that's a side tangent. And here with Kenyan Drake, why I loved taking him with that selection is I think he's very similar to A.J. Dillon in that you're looking at Kenyan Drake as a running back that you can start on a week-to-week basis and give you some kind of floor. I mean, you're not going to be expecting a lot. You're not going to be expecting a top 24 running back when Josh Jacobs is healthy. But what you can expect is you can expect Kenyan Drake, who is 27 years old, so you don't like to see that, but you can see him have a guaranteed role on this offense, even with Josh Jacobs being healthy. And the reason for this is the contract that you actually had the Raiders giving Kenyan Drake. And this is a big thing I talk about every offseason, in that, I mean, literally ignore the coach speak, ignore what you're hearing out of any scout coming out of training camp, because they're really just trying to pump some articles. They're really just trying to get some buzz going. What matters in terms of listening to teams telling us what they think is looking at draft picks, looking at contracts, because that's the one real concrete piece of evidence that we have with what a coaching staff, what a general manager wants from a player. And it kind of tells us about their usage a lot more than a press conference can. And here, Kenyan Drake gets $11 million guaranteed with this contract. Now, I know that doesn't sound like that much for really anybody in the NFL, but understanding how these veteran running backs sign their deals is crucial. Now, $11 million guaranteed is by far and away further than what you're finding with really any other running back besides Aaron Jones this offseason. I mean, if we just go and look at where James Conner signed to, I mean, Arizona's old team, James Conner signed for less than $2 million guaranteed. So here, Kenyan Drake is getting paid 5x, more than 5x, what James Conner is with this contract. That is massive. And there is clearly a role for Kenyan Drake on this offense, where we look at running backs that are not Josh Jacobs in this team last year. They got 121 carries, and more importantly, they got 50 targets last season. And we have seen this. I mean, Josh Jacobs, while yes, you can make the argument that he could catch passes if the coaching staff let him, well, they're not letting him do that, especially not with this contract that Kenyan Drake just gets. So Drake coming in, going to be a pass-catching running back right away in LAV, Las Vegas. And what we also like with Drake is very similar to what we had with A.J. Dillon, is that you have that role right away in the offense. And if something happened to Josh Jacobs, Kenyan Drake could all of a sudden step up into being a high-end running back 2, low-end running back 1. I mean, who knows? Because you look at that stretch in 2019 where he had 8 weeks as the starting running back in Arizona, and he was getting all the usage. There he averages 15.5 carries a game, 4.5 targets a game, almost 100 total yards a game, and he has a touchdown a game as well. Now, during that stretch, he finished as the running back 3 in fantasy, only behind Christian McCaffrey and Derrick Henry. He finishes directly in front of Ezekiel Elliott and Saquon Barkley. And now, of course, this is a very small sample, and I want to remind everyone, there was literally nobody last year that was screaming as much as we were to avoid Kenyan Drake, because everybody was buying into a very small sample and drafting Kenyan Drake in the second round of fantasy drafts, which was ludicrous. But now that we actually have a massive discount on Drake, he's going to a team where he's not expected to be a bell cow, which should never really be his role, even though we know he can do it if he's asked to do it. I think Drake provides a lot of value in fantasy this year as someone that has a role on his offense already. And if something happens to Jacobs, I mean, he steps into being a 3-down running back. Now, our last guy we are going to be talking about here is going to be Kareem Hunt. And with Kareem Hunt, I mean, the upside to see is very easy. I don't want to talk about this too much. And to be completely honest, it's not like that we're that much higher on Kareem Hunt than most people. We do have him as running back 24 and ADP has him as running back 25. Now, the difference, if you go over there on Patreon and check it out, is going to be that we have him in tier 7 alongside Josh Jacobs, Travis Etienne, and Javonte Williams. And the running backs that are going next to him in drafts currently in Myles Gaskin, Mike Davis, and Chase Edmonds, I mean, they're a clear tier behind Kareem Hunt, in my opinion. And it's because Hunt fits this same exact mold that we just discussed with Kenyan Drake, that we just discussed with A.J. Dillon. And that this is a running back that you can start on a week-to-week basis. And if something happens to the other running back in his backfield, all of a sudden, he becomes a league-winning player in fantasy. I mean, riddle me this right now. So if Nick Chubb gets traded tomorrow, which of course isn't happening. I'm not saying Nick Chubb is getting traded, so that's probably a bad scenario to use. But let's just go, okay, what happens if Nick Chubb pulls a Saquon Barkley this upcoming season? What happens if Nick Chubb tears his ACL in week 2? And you know this information going into your fantasy draft. Where are you drafting Kareem Hunt? Because I would argue that Kareem Hunt would be a top 5 pick overall if Nick Chubb was not there. Now, this is for a multitude of reasons. A, we have seen Kareem Hunt get the usage in the receiving game, even with Chubb in this backfield. I mean, in 2019, with Nick Chubb being healthy every game that he played, Kareem Hunt averages over 5 targets a game. He averages 5.5. Last year, he averages 3 targets a game at the same time. And we know that he has the frame where he can see usage on all 3 downs. We saw it back in 2017 in Kansas City. Keep in mind, this is his rookie year. So Kareem Hunt, as a rookie, averages over 19 points per game, only behind the combination. And remember, this is 2017, so these running backs were in their prime: Todd Gurley, Le'Veon Bell, Ezekiel Elliott, and Alvin Kamara. So Kareem Hunt has already showed us that he can be in that elite category before. And at the same time, he's running behind the best offensive line in the NFL. He has that guaranteed passing down role on lock. So I would definitely prefer drafting Kareem Hunt in like the 5th, 6th round compared to drafting Nick Chubb in the 1st. Now, yes, of course, the median projection is going to be way better with Nick Chubb. He's going to be seeing more touches on a week-to-week basis. But I think you get the same access to that elite level ceiling in terms of, I mean, if something happened to the other running back in the backfield, I mean, the one thing that's going to be horrible for me this year, because you know I'm not drafting Nick Chubb anywhere, is if something happened to Kareem Hunt, Nick Chubb would be the running back 1, running back 2 overall. I mean, he would probably be right behind Christian McCaffrey, but Nick Chubb would be the running back 2 overall. But I think you kind of get that same access to that ceiling with Kareem Hunt in the case of if anything happened to Nick Chubb, and you're getting it at a massive, massive discount. Now, thank you, my dudes. I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. Of course, go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. We're literally growing like 100 subscribers a day right now. And yeah, I will see y'all with the video tomorrow. We've gotten a ton of new members joining the flock. Thank you, Grind for Gold, Devin, Bungified, Brian, Brody, Victor, Chris, Grant, Trevor, and David. Thank you, my dudes.